this video will inevitably be a little bit self-obsessed, a little bit self-absorbed, and I do apologize for that. But I've set this channel up as a place for thoughts about progressive rock and music that's influenced by the progressive rock tradition, and it seemed pretty key to come back to the question at some point of why progressive rock in particular. Now, music in general is very important to me, both as a listener and as a creator. And I have a lot of trouble imagining how I could really engage in the one without the other, right? Both the act of considering and digesting other people's work and of creating mine are really very tightly wound together in my mind. I have a lot of trouble thinking about how I could really regularly do one of those things if I weren't also doing the other. But more than any other type of music, I do have a special relationship to progressive rock, where it's still the type of music that I listen to and think about the most. It's still the type of music that is most at the foundation of how I think about and evaluate music and the philosophy that informs what I make. And I was born in 1984, so I'm a generation younger than most of the people that grew up surrounded by progressive rock. It was always a niche thing in my world. It wasn't something that was in the air the way that it was for a lot of people who were 20 or 25 years older than me. My parents mostly disliked prog, so it wasn't something that I came to through family. And, I grew up in a small farming community in central Washington state. So to the extent that I really had friends growing up, none of them were that interested in anything other than the conventional popular music of the time. And the entry point for me, probably like a lot of people who didn't grow up in the 70s, was later Genesis. I got into the self-titled album and Invisible Touch and We Can't Dance through exposure to the hit singles on the radio. And those are very accessible albums to a 10-year-old, right? Which is the age that I was when I heard that and got really interested in it. And the thing about those later Genesis albums is, they're catchy, they're straightforwardly emotional in a way that's accessible even to a very young person. But at the same time, they have sonic and lyrical detail that maybe other things that you might have heard on the radio at the time didn't, and that does reveal itself with more and more attention and study. So even though those albums are less complex than the classic material, they still had the effect of training me in a certain kind of deeper listening. Now, in the last couple of years of high school and in college, I did eventually start making friends and expanding my horizons and paying more attention to what my peers were into. But there was a way that Prog had taught me to listen to music and, to think about it and to live in it and to experience it, that did kind of set the way that I thought about all those other things as I approached them. And there were aspects of Prog that I did find in other things, right? So, as a later teenager in my early 20s, I had a lot of friends who were into alternative music. And, I could hear the King Crimson influence in Tool, right? Or I could really appreciate the textual richness and some of the quasi-conceptual aspects of Nine Inch Nails because of the background that I had in progressive rock. Now, I don't know if I consciously understood any of what I've been saying until just the last couple of years, because it's felt a lot more relevant just recently. I'm not unhappy, but life has been settling into a greater and greater amount of repetition and solitude. I live in a small town, I work from home, I go out less, I travel less, I see fewer people, I have fewer friends. I'm at a greater place of wealth and material comfort than I've really ever been, but somehow that's coincided with the narrowing of my horizons. Obviously some of this is COVID related, but maybe actually less of it than you'd think, right? It seems like an inevitable consequence of the age, meaning, my age as an individual, but then also the age that I live in. And I don't like it, I kind of hate it really, but I don't have much sense that I can do anything other than weakly resist it, right? And I've been listening to really almost nothing except classic progressive rock for the last year or so in particular, right? which feels, it's something that I'm maybe a bit bothered by, right? Because it does feel like I'm retrenching, right? Like I'm not expanding or getting into new things like I did in my 20s and 30s. But what I've realized is that, as my life now has become more like my adolescent life, after all this time, the music still serves the same function of creating an imaginative internal space to go into. And it's actually even maybe much more intense in that way now that I'm much more engaged than I've been in the past as a creator of that type of music. So I'm incredibly grateful for the refuge and the adventure that this music has given me, even if maybe I didn't really totally understand in a conscious way how all that was working until pretty recently. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to explore those thoughts and try to get them down. So thanks for paying attention to anybody who's made it this far, and hope you have a good week.